Hi there, I'm Des.
And I'm Tim, and together Des and I head up the men's ministry Momentum Australia.
Momentum has multiple functions, but primarily our aim is to help men to succeed in life, to do life better.
We run a weekly radio show that goes all around Australia where we talk about anything and everything that relates to men.
And we encourage men to do life in community, to do life with other men where we can be accountable, we can be welcome, we can be open and honest about what's happening in our world.
We'd love you to have a look around our website. That's momentumaustralia.org. There you'll find a bunch of resources to help you on your journey and all of our previous episodes and topics.
We thank you for your interest in Momentum Australia, and we hope you enjoyed this video today.
Well, welcome to this week's Momentum. It is Tim and Des with you once again. And look, it's the beginning of the year. We're super pumped to be back in the studio doing this, and super pumped also for our special guest, which we'll get to in just a moment. But Momentum Australia is the website, momentumaustralia.org. Love you to have a look around that after the show and find out a bit more about who we are. And maybe even consider financially supporting us this year, because tell you what, Des, there's a lot that we've got going on behind the scenes as we come into 2023.
It's amazing. I mean, this is our third year, and I said it last time, and we're now into our third year, and God provides, and it's amazing. And the other thing to remember, of course, is Momentum CARELINE, 1-800-000 men. What an amazing number, that men can remember really easily. So 1-800-000-636, provided by our friends at CARELINE Connections. And you can reach out at that number between 9 and 11, 7 days a week, 1-800-000 men.
And really the backstory behind that, before we go any further, we at Momentum, Des and I particularly, and the core team behind us too, we have real hearts for men all around Australia. That's you listening right now, to get connected, to not stay in isolation, but to get connected, have some conversations around what's happening in your life. And that's the encouragement. If you don't feel like you've got someone that's perhaps safe or trusted for you right now, well, that number, 1-800-000-636, you can have a confidential chat with someone on the end of that phone. Okay, so this week's show, it's a funny thing when you talk about being a nice guy. I mean, Des, I think you and I are pretty nice guys.
I know you are.
In today's society, that has a whole other meaning,
Yes.
this idea of nice guy.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And on the surface, nice guys can appear to be kind and thoughtful and genuinely caring, but sometimes there may be an undercurrent which is far from nice.
Yeah, interesting. So we're going to explore that in this week's show. What's the difference between a nice guy and a good man? And I'll tell you, he is a good man. He's a nice guy, and he's a good friend of ours too. Pastor and counselor Steve Wickham is back with us on Momentum this week. Great to have you here, Steve.
Thanks so much, Des and Tim. Wonderful to be back. Always great to be on Momentum.
So, Steve, let's start by setting the scene, because obviously, when we hear that you're a nice guy, we think that's a positive thing. But there is this other thing going around called the nice guy syndrome. And as Des mentioned, that there are sides to that aren't particularly nice. So when we look at what the nice guy syndrome is, give us a quick overview.
Well, the whole thing is, the difficulty is discerning who is nice from who isn't, that kind of thing. But I also think to preface all of this by the societal expectations on men that we be nice. A lot of our society drives around not to be aggressive, the whole domestic violence thing and that sort of thing. And seriously, it's a serious message. And a lot of men want to be nice. We don't want to come across as aggressive. And sometimes that can push us into a place of kind of, if we're insecure, it becomes a bit of an issue, and we become people pleasers, and we become fawners. I think we've talked before about fawning behavior and that sort of thing, or apologizing too much, accommodating too much. And it's not good for us or our relationships when we're like that.
Wow.
Can I just pause you there and just clarify the fawn piece for me? Because I'm aware of most of the terms that go around these days, but fawning is still fairly something that I haven't quite got my head around. So can you clarify that?
Yeah, a lot of people have heard of fight and flight and freeze. Freeze is another trauma response. So these are responses that are inbuilt in us for us to survive, basically. And, we've heard of fight and flight. Freeze is a new one. Sometimes we freeze in the moment of trauma. But the other one is fawn. If we find we're dominated by somebody, if someone's too big and too strong for us, sometimes we people please through that. That is fawning. The definition of the people pleasing piece in that is fawning. Right. And the fawning behavior it negates our own needs, and it puts the other. It's basically it's submission when we probably shouldn't.
So what do you think, I mean, obviously there's a spectrum here of being a nice guy, really a nice guy, and being a nice guy that sort of has another agenda, where, you know, what sort of things would you look for in each end of the spectrum? Because we're all maybe in somewhere in the middle, maybe. I didn't know.
Yeah, it's a very hard one, and in a lot of ways, time really tells. If you're in a relationship with a person, you really need some time to be able to assess where their motives are, where their heart is. And the other thing is, it's not just about this whole aspect of insecurity that will drive fawning behavior, but it's also about, on the other side, you've got entitled men, because we're talking men, entitled men, which comes out of narcissism.
Yeah.
And, you know, so you've got both of these at kind of both sides. And there's probably I think we'll talk about it later about what's the solution around that. But I think essentially, how do we assess who we're dealing with? We got to check on what people's hearts are. I mean, people, it's really a case of time, I suppose, and we should be able to say no to people. We should be able to push back a little, and take it from there.
So what would you say if I described somebody, John, Patrick, whoever, as a narcissistic person in a relationship or personally?
Yep.
What traits would you see in that person?
So the 3 E's around narcissism are around entitlement, exploitation. So they'll exploit people and situations, and they do that not just here and there, but it's a pattern. And the other thing is they lack empathy. So those 3 E's, entitlement, empathy, or lack of empathy, and exploitation, tend to happen in a fairly patterned sort of way.
Yeah.
So the thing is, when people end up in a relationship, say with a man, and it's 2 or 3 months down the track or 6 months down the track, and they start to see some of these traits, you can start to see them as red flags, what's called red flags, in the earlier part. Unfortunately, it takes a little while for the charisma to wear off, for the winsomeness of the person to wear off.
Steve, can I ask you to clarify then? Because for all of us, and, you know, Des was rightful in saying this, I mean, we're all at somewhere on the spectrum, right? I mean, we can have these moments where we're genuine and we hold space well, and we are genuinely nice, and there's empathy and there's all of the good stuff. But then, you know, our buttons can get pushed, or we're short and irritable or whatever. And then we might tend over towards this other side of, oh, well, I'm displaying traits that perhaps aren't super healthy right now.
Yep.
And is it, I suppose the question is then, is it fair to say that most of us will fluctuate?
Yes, most certainly. And one of the best things I like about the book, and I can't remember the name of it, but it's on the Enneagram, and it's we can the Enneagram looks at the strengths and weaknesses of every type, and it focuses on the sin that we struggle with. The essential thing is, we are sinners, and this is where it plays into Christian theology. We will have times when we are narcissistic, maybe a season, or there are particular Cloud and Townsend. So John Townsend talked about pocket entitlement. So a book in 2015 called The Entitlement Cure. He talks about a pocket entitlement. So we have pockets of our lives where we're a bit narcissistic on. But the other thing is, we've all got insecurities as well. So areas of insecurity, or there could be a season of insecurity, you know, coming out of loss and grief, or coming out of trauma. So both of these come out of when we are weak, and it's really the challenge is to become honest about it, and so we can grow through those periods.
And I guess it's important that we engage with our partner, and, you know, if we identify that in ourselves, talk to your partner and say, hey, you know, I'm sorry, I've gone over the line. I'm showing traits that I don't like. Help me work through those issues. Does that make sense?
That makes huge sense. There's not going to remember a time when I did that with my wife, and it was humbling. It was kind of, humbling to hear her say, I think there's something in that for you. Go away and have more of a read on that. I think that's a good point.
Yeah. So then that begs the question, right? Because, I mean, as Des rightly said, you know, that's a good starting point. But your answer, Steve, really, when you boil it down, is it takes a great deal of self-awareness in a guy, particularly, because that's what we're talking about right now, to be able to go, yeah, actually, And I suppose then there's two camps, right? There's the singles who
Yep.
don't have a person to bounce off, or they might have a partner. But then there's the marrieds, and as those of us who've been married before and are married, we know it's a good mirror in marriage to go, oh gosh, okay. So let's just park the marriage for a sec, but let's go to the single guys listening right now. And they're just going about their life, and for the most part, everything's okay. But then there's obviously these moments. I mean, what sort of awareness do they need to have, and how do they get that would indicate that, at moments they might have some stuff to deal with when it comes to this nice guy syndrome, if they don't have somebody in their, in their peripheral most of their life to kind of challenge them on those things.
And that can be hard, and that's why the importance of being connected with other men and other people in groups. And this is the best part about being part of a good church is that you can get that sort of feedback. But looking within oneself and reflecting on oneself, are there times when I find I'm dishonest and the dishonesty falls back on me? I have to cover for things for other people. Do I find that I'm manipulating some situations? And why am I doing that? Is there a particular kind of control that I'm putting into my relationships and situations? Is there any passive aggressiveness that's coming out? So that's actually a demonstration of huge humility if a person can actually reflect to that degree and be honest to that point.
So, Steve, what is interesting, I'm just following on from what Tim said, the single guy. I mean, society is so self-righteous and self-justifying, and anything goes, and I can do whatever I want to do. No accountability in many cases. So, young guys who are listening, how do they move from that framework into a framework that says, I'm going to look at myself, I'm going to question what I do, I'm going to, to see what's going on in my world? How do you get kids, young people, to do that?
Yeah, well, I think it's very big around motive. What's your motivation? I mean, if to motivate young people to look into this area, you will not grow. We cannot grow if we don't transcend these traits. If we can't do humility is the absolute bedrock of growth. And if we want to grow and become all that what God wants us to be, that's the upside of all this. Of course, there are growing pains throughout, but God blesses the courage of a person to say, "Oh, I think there's some growth areas there for me. I think I've got there's a challenge there for me," and that's God wanting to be good to us.
Yeah, that's good.
I just wrote that down. I think it's really good. Humility is the bedrock of growth. It's powerful. It's powerful. So then on that note, that flows in beautifully actually with where we're going with this. And then let's bring the marrieds into the equation then, Steve. Because let's be honest, as guys, right, it can be pretty humbling. And when you said what your wife said to you, I think you might need to go and, I mean, that takes a degree of humility to not want to bite back to that and respond.
Yeah.
Right. But to go, you know what? She's actually right. I need to go and have a look at that. So for guys who are married, how do they find the balance of allowing their wife to speak into that space? Because it can be pretty confronting as a man, as a supposed head of the home and all of that sort of stuff, to then be told, because sometimes we can feel like it's, I'm being told by my wife or I'm under the thumb or whatever, the negative side of that, when really what she's trying to do is highlight something that actually can end up being a positive.
Well, here's a message to both men and women, because the men we need to be humble. And when my wife challenged, and it hasn't just been the once, there's been a few times, when she's done it in a spirit of wanting the best for me, and it's not been in shoving it in my, rubbing my face in it, if you know what I mean. So the message is to wives is to approach it with humility as well, because I think those two mirror as well. Now, if you find you're in a situation where you're submitting all the time, you are the nice guy in your marriage or your relationship, ask yourself whether your partner is probably more aggressive or more too assertive. You know what I mean? So the challenge there is then in the marriage dynamic for both to grow, and, it's not just on the person who's got the nice guy, traits. Ultimately, God's calling us all to humility. And it's the only way, marriages can grow, through both partners being humble. And and not goading one another and that sort of thing.
Yes, and that's such a thing. I mean, I noticed it when I came to Australia, and that's 40 years ago or whatever. It's exactly that. I mean, the behavior of both parties is key.
Yeah.
Right? It is that acceptance that you're in this together. You're there to support and help each other. And you know, it doesn't work if one person gets aggressive and wants to put the other down. That won't work.
No.
Yeah, I love that. Humility is the bedrock of growth. And where we're going now, then, guys, is what do we do if we feel like we want to evaluate ourselves and check ourselves, see what might be in our lives that is perhaps unhealthy or needs some identifying and then some work? There's some steps here, Steve, you're going to take us through that we can look at and hopefully get this syndrome out of us so that we can actually be a genuinely nice guy instead of an unhealthy one. The first one is honesty. I mean, that's always a good place to start. And I guess when we unpack that, the first part, of course, is getting honest with ourselves. When we do that, though, what sort of things do we need to ask ourselves or perhaps put to ourselves that would invoke or evoke an honest response?
Well, I always base it in the prayer of Psalm 139, 23 and 24, just those last two verses in Psalm 139 that talk about, Lord, oh Lord, search me and show me if there's any wickedness or if there's anything offensive, any anxiety within me that shouldn't be there. So that's actually a good prayer to pray, but that might not always lead us to being honest with ourselves is a bit of a conundrum. I think it's a balance with having others being able to speak into our lives, safe others, not people who would manipulate it for their own gain, but people who we can trust to get some clarity around that. But I think we know when we're honest and when we're not. The other thing, I suppose, is what others think. Do others believe that we're honest? Would others see us as honest and full of integrity? And that's
the people we just do life with.
That's right. In fact, that's probably one of the best compliments we could get. You're so honest. I love your integrity. That kind of thing. You know, that's what we should be driving. And we were talking about this in the break about this whole issue of who are we when we're not, when nobody else is looking. God sees everything.
Yes.
God sees everything. So we're fooling nobody by being dishonest.
Yes, no, that's right. And, you know, and a relationship with if you're married, relationship with your wife, if it's healthy, those things would come out naturally. You know what I mean? It would just flow both ways.
Yeah.
I wasn't quite honest when I said that, or, you know, so it would engender, I guess, more difficult when there's friction in the relationship.
And can she challenge you?
Yes. Do you give her permission to?
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah, exactly.
And doing that in a healthy space for both of us, right? And that's where I want to come in with, actually, and not necessarily our wives, but for guys. You said, Steve, about having people speak into that space. Now, one of the key things with honesty, and you put this in the notes, that we must be ruthlessly accountable. Right. So ruthlessly accountable. We must be accountable to other people. And that is important for all of us.
Yep.
So then speak into that space for guys, because obviously who we have speak into that space is really important, because there will be people in our world that will quite happily tell us all of our failings and how, you know, we've missed it there and how we upset them there and we offended them there. But they're coming from, you know, an unhealthy space. How do we recognize then healthy people and safe people that can speak into our lives and hold us to that ruthless accountability?
Well, hopefully we can assess whether they actually have our heart and our growth and our development at their core.
Right.
And if they are really truly interested. Some people might say it and still be manipulative. Oh, look, I'm doing this for your benefit, and that is quite often a manipulation. But there are people by their deeds, not by their words, but by their deeds, who will demonstrate that. Look, you can take my advice, take it or leave it, you know, and there's no judgment. There's no strings attached. That's the kind of safe person that we want to.
That's fantastic advice. I think that is really right up there, because, you know, a lot of people don't know, you know, who they're talking to in terms of where they're coming from, what their agenda is, and so forth. So surround yourself with people who really know you, who you have tried and tested life with them. They're the people that you'll want to get alongside. And it may be your spouse, it may be your girlfriend, it may be your best buddy, whoever that is.
I mean, the core of that again speaks to the core of momentum, which is, guys getting people around their lives, not just to hold them accountable, but to do life with. And of course, we won't be able to hold accountable until we start getting honest and real and vulnerable and about things that are happening in our lives, and vice versa, right? So for both of us.
And one last thing there, Tim, I think around accountability. Accountability shouldn't hurt. It shouldn't be painful to be held to account. So part of that is accepting, being held to account. But the other person's not doing it out of trying to bring pain into your life. It's done in a redemptive way. It's done in a good way, and it's all upside in that way.
Yeah,
we've talked a little bit. I just got to get your thoughts on this, Steve. Lots of guys who are listening will not have somebody in their life that they can rely on. They may be single. They may have moved to a new town. They may not have close friends deliberately. What would you recommend to those men to get somebody alongside them? Because most men would say, I don't know how to do that.
I
don't know where to go to do that.
Well, I'm hoping that the local church is that kind of place, that there are Christian people, and essentially what the Christian faith calls us to is to love one another, is to live out this, being in relationships where we can safely hold each other to account. But we live in a very diverse world around media and that sort of thing. We can still Zoom, or we can FaceTime with people and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So let's speak into that space for a tick and just bounce off that and go that, again, one of the core messages from Momentum is intentionality in that space, because it's not going to happen by accident, and a lot of guys listening, if you're feeling isolated, with respect, some of that is on you. We're not waiting for people to reach out to us. We also have to be initiators in this too.
Yes.
Otherwise it will not happen.
Yeah.
And to be honest, using my own backstory, which again, I won't bore you with, but for 38 years, I waited for people because I didn't want to reach out, because I didn't want to repeat the rejection from my mum. So I expected people to come to me instead of actually reaching out. But of course, me reaching out, put myself out there, and I was afraid of rejection. So again, just want to say from my own backstory in the last 10 years that I've learned, you have to be intentional with this. Otherwise it will not happen. People aren't just going to suddenly fall into your lap and come into your life.
Words of life. Very, very much words of life.
So moving on, control is number 2. So when we talk about this, are we talking about our ability or our desire to control people as opposed to just our lives in general? Is that what we're talking about here? Do I try and control and manipulate people?
Yes, definitely. It's definitely not talking about self-control, which is a fruit of the spirit. It's talking about controlling other people and other situations. And again, there might be pockets of this in our lives. Where are we not happy with a particular outcome? Where do we need to manipulate and bring things around a little bit and actually exert some control? The issue is control kills relationships.
Yes.
It kills the ability for the other person to feel empowered. Nobody wants those sorts of dynamics in their relationships.
But you hear that all the time, don't you, Steve? Men saying the only way I can keep my marriage together is by controlling my family. There's so many men would say that, wouldn't it? I mean,
that's right. And the
irony
irony
is, I have to control my kids. I have to control my wife. I have to control who we're friends with, who we're not friends with, all that stuff.
And that is a recipe for disaster. That's a recipe for destruction of marriages. And you see so many marriages, so many women walking away because of those elements are in their life. And the pity of it all is these children, as adult children, who don't have a relationship with their father because of these things.
Exactly.
I mean, come on.
So the manipulation piece then off the back of that, Steve, I mean, control is one side. I suppose, how does that differ? Control and manipulation, what's the subtle difference? Because they seem quite similar.
Yeah. I suppose you could probably say that control might be overt and covert. So the manipulation's probably the more the covert, and nobody likes to be manipulated. We can feel it from a mile off. We can feel the manipulation. Control might be more overt, where no, that's not going to happen, not on my watch, that kind of thing. And no correspondence to be entered into. When we start to do that, we become anti-relational. We can't be related with. So I think one's more covert and one's more overt.
So the whole gaslighting thing would sit in manipulation, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And manipulate how people think and try and control them through words.
And it's a huge issue, not just a huge issue, but it's a huge topic, gaslighting, because there's so many different, we gaslight ourselves a lot of the time, or other people gaslight, and they talk about this being crazy making. So you start to second guess yourself. You
Yes.
start to wonder if my memory is, am I remembering things right? Did that really happen? You know, and those sorts of things, which is really, really caustic for a relationship.
Steve, can I ask then, with manipulation, let me just get a bit of a clarity on this, because obviously there's times when, for example, if we're setting up a time to catch up, right? And we can go, oh, well, I've got these times free. This is my preference, blah, 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 blah. You know, what's the difference, I suppose, be going, well, this is my preference.
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily manipulating the situation, but I am going, look, this actually works better for me. If you could do that, da, da, da.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
do you understand? Like, it's a subtle kind of, am I being manipulative, or is it just I'm stating my preference and I have good boundaries? Or again, for me, it gets a little gray at times.
The hallmark of the best relationships is we should be able to negotiate.
Right.
We should all be able to say, well, this actually won't work for me, or I prefer to meet at this particular time for these reasons. Or if you don't want to, you're not in a position where you need to declare that information. No, I prefer this. I think that's fine. That's just negotiation. And also we're talking transactional issues here. So I guess where it becomes sticky is where, you know, if you've already got strained relationships or toxicity in a relationship, it can become, the smallest things can become the hardest to negotiate.
The key is always in this discussion, motivation.
Yes.
What is the motivation behind the action that you're going to take?
Yes.
Isn't that correct?
Yep.
So we can self-examine that. You know, we all know why we're doing something. If I'm going to say something to my wife or to my girlfriend, or that, you know, I do know, I will always know what's driving me to go that way. And we can question our motivation. And that leads us to determine where we are in the spectrum.
Yeah. And motivation / heart, I think from a Christian viewpoint, the heart, you know, and the Bible talks a lot about the heart and the, you know, how the heart is and how much integrity there is in the heart being the seat of the emotions and that sort of thing. So, but I would love to also talk about WYSIWYG as well at some point, Des, Tim, you know, this whole concept of computer programming language. Which is not computer programming language in this context, because what you see is what you get. WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get. We need to be the same people in our back of stage as we are front of stage. So what everybody else sees, that's who we are, and in our home context.
And now it's a lot easier if you do that. You know, you don't have to remember so much stuff.
No. I think that was a Mark Twain quote, wasn't it? The more you lie, the more you have to remember.
That's right.
Yeah.
So let's bounce off that, Steve, because that works in well. Initially, I thought with the three ball guys on the call that we've got there, that you were coming up with another option there with a week, but we won't go there. But look, in all seriousness, in the few moments we got left, that does lead into then this idea of secrecy. Are there things in my life that I'm keeping a secret? I do acts of, you know, things in secrecy. And I love what you put there at the end. Righteous honesty is what is to be pursued. So just expand on that for us.
Well, righteous honesty is, what is it before God's sight? Because we will all meet God. We will all have our face-to-face meeting with God on the other side of our, you know, when we die. Let's live honestly now, so there is less accounting in that side. What does God see? Are we as Christians the righteousness of God? Are we living it out?
Yes.
And as Des said before, you know, we only have to ask ourselves. It's not hard, to be honest. And honesty always doesn't start pointing fingers at the other person. It's pointing a finger at ourselves, and not in a judging way, but just being in an honest way.
Yeah.
Right. So the final thing is then passive aggressive and passive aggression. What does that look like?
Well, that looks like, on the more overt kind of side, people receive us as he looks like he's agreeing, but I know that he's disagreeing. He looks like he's being accommodating, but he's not. The heart's not there. The heart's not in it, and it's completely lost, because, you know, we're actually being angry in a very passive way, and people know it. People can feel it, and we don't get away with it in our relationships.
No, that's exactly right.
I mean, there's a lot in this show, and again, I think even myself is gonna go back and have a listen to this, but I encourage you guys listening. Nice guy syndrome is what we've been talking about, and what it looks like, and then some of the things we need to do as guys to hold ourselves accountable, and a bit of a checklist that we can run through and go, am I demonstrating these traits, whether it's a lot of the time or some of the time, and do I have people in my life that I can be honest with, hold me accountable, ask some real honest, hard questions of. And at the end of the day, as you said, Steve, I think in the first half, humility is the bedrock of growth. And I think if we can take that on board and take that on the chin as we start into 2023, we might end up being radically different people by the end of the year. But Steve Wickham has been our special guest this week on Momentum. Steve, it's been a huge topic. We thank you for unpacking it with us, the nice guy syndrome. And we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks for being a part of Momentum, man.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Tim and Des. Wonderful.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you for watching this week's show, and we hope you subscribe to Momentum so you can find out what's happening in the shows in the future.
Absolutely. And keep an eye on our website too. That's momentumaustralia.org. There you'll find all of our shows and a whole heap of resources to help you on your journey. That is momentumaustralia.org.
Until next time, keep moving forward
with Momentum.